Panel, a few things in my speech. First of all, I'm going to give you some framing about what we think the current status quo looks like. Secondly, I'm going to outline exactly what our model looks like. Thirdly, I'm going to tell you that on principle, young people are most impacted by the voting decisions that are made today, and therefore they should have the most say. And finally, I'm going to talk about what will be the concrete change that will happen in politics as a result of this. But firstly, on framing, note that in the status quo, old people have a disproportionate amount of power in society. So what does this look like? Old people are in general usually the people who are, for example, in the board of directors of major companies that are, for example, causing major climate change to our world, right? And are involved in doing lots of injustices through that. Note that older people are in general usually the people who are heading politics, right? So people who are usually presidents of countries, who are ministers, and in general who are kind of in parliament tend to, in the status quo, be older people, right? Disproportionately more so than the population. And note also that old people in general tend to vote the most. That is, there's the highest level of voting among oldest people. And what this means is that in general, throughout the power structures that exist in society, usually the people who are oldest, who have been able to rise up the ranks the best, have had the highest amount of power, right? And that means that the values that have existed, for example, 50 years ago, are still pervasive in today's society, despite the fact that the majority of people alive don't necessarily agree with this. So then from this, what is our model like? We will basically have a tiered system whereby different age brackets will have a different amount of votes. So what this will look like is that people who are between 18 and 30 will have 2 votes. People who are between 30 and 50 will have 1.7 of a vote. 50 to 70, they will have 1.3. And finally, people from 70 onwards will have 1 vote. So we think that in general, this means that there will be a significant difference so that young people will have more of a say. However, this still does not mean that older people do not have the ability to change things with their vote, right? So now onto the principle. Basically, young people are very much affected by decisions that are made today more so than older people. So how is this true? So at the point where you are able to live longer, so at the point where you are, for example, 20, and you probably have at least 60 years of life ahead of you, when there is a political decision that is made, for example, with regard to how much child support is given, or another kind of political decision that completely impacts you in the decisions that you are going to make in the future, whether that decision be that you want to start a family, whether that decision is to get educated, and so forth. For a lot of older people, these things don't affect them anymore. So for an older person who may have already had children, they don't really care about this level of child support, right? Or an older person who has already been educated, if they have had that opportunity, they don't care about how high tuition fees are for younger people, right? So what this means is that these issues that are concretely impacting young people and the decisions and kind of agency that they're able to have in the future, these are things that older people don't care about. So then what do we think will happen when young people who will be able to make decisions and will be able to have a bigger impact in politics, and how will that change politics? We think that at the point where young people know that their vote matters more, they will vote more. And why is this? Because in the status quo, we think that young people are very much disillusioned by politics. They see things like Brexit being passed, they see things like Trump being voted in, and they feel that this is not what they politically believe in, and this is not what they voted for. At the point where they know that when they vote, they are making a disproportionately larger impact, we think that they will be more encouraged to vote, because in the status quo, they feel like their vote doesn't make a difference, as opposed to this block of older people who are kind of voting more. But we also think that this will mean that young people will be more engaged in politics. So we think that at the point where they feel like their vote has more of an impact, they're more likely to, for example, follow the news. They're more likely to follow the kind of discussions that are going on in Parliament, due to the fact that they know that they have impacted it to such a significant degree, and therefore they will feel more ownership of it, and therefore they will also want to follow up on what happens in politics. So then what will be the concrete changes that happen in politics as a consequence of young people voting more? We think that this will in general lead to better decision making. And why is this? Because we think that young people, first of all, are more likely to be educated due to the fact that previous generations did not have the same opportunities to be educated, which means that they're likely to be able to make very good decisions. But secondly, we think that young people have, first of all, better access to media, but also secondly, better media literacy. So what does this mean? This means that young people have the best ability to find information about candidates, but also the best ability to discern whether those things are true, right? So in the status quo, there's a lot of information that is being shared that is kind of false in politics. Things like the European Union is taking away money that could go to the NHS. So we think that young people are less likely to fall for these kind of false claims in politics due to the fact that they have been exposed to media more and they've been taught more about media literacy. But I will take opening opposition if you have anything. Okay, so how will the decisions be then better in politics? We think that young people care about certain kinds of issues that will be more likely to be present in politics. We think that young people disproportionately believe more in climate change and believe that climate change is a real thing. That means that we think that young people are more likely to vote in green parties or left-leaning parties that kind of believe climate change is a major issue and that it should. We also think that young people are more likely to care about social justice issues and more likely to vote for things that mean a better life for more people. So what does this look like? We think that disproportionately, we see that young people, for example, want to vote for things like gay rights due to the fact that between different generations, there are different sets of beliefs that go on as society progresses, right? So when someone has grown up in the 70s, they're more likely to have those belief systems that are in the 70s, right? And that means that that is what a person is ingrained to believe is kind of the normal values of society. So if when you were young, it was believed that kind of being gay was a sin, you are more likely to carry that in your life and you are probably less able to change that opinion as an older person. Whereas younger people have probably grown up with more progressive values where or people with various social justice issues have become more prominent in discourse, and therefore young people are more aware of them and are more likely to have more liberal views. And we think then that there will be, in general, a very positive change in politics for better decisions. Thank you. Vote OG.
Thank you for that speech, and now I invite the leader of the opposition to continue this debate.
Okay, let's start some response to opening government. Opening government, firstly, they say that in the status quo, old people have a disproportionately large amount of power rather than compared to young people. But this is not true because young people also actually have a lot of power in the status quo. That is to say, they have, as opening government already claimed, they have a better education, which means that they had much more opportunity to get proper education, which means that they have a much more flexible skills. That is to say, they are young and they can learn a lot of things easily, which means that it is very easy for them to get to the top positions like CEO of a company or get at least some proper job, and because they have a lot of physical and mental power to achieve things. Moreover, also in politics, we have seen recently, it has been a trend that either governments, like for example in Finland, there are lots of young people being elected as a prime minister or other top positions. But moreover, governments started to giving like quotas for young people in the parliament. So this means that it is not very much. Like, yes, maybe there is some still remaining old people have like much more power, but this depends also on other issues. That is to say, for example, if you have a privilege, for example, if you are a Harvard student and you are very smart and you are being raised in this very privileged society, you have a very privileged position in the society, which means that you have a more likely to be like to get to the top position, and which means that you still have a lot of power. So this does not much depend on your age, but rather on your specific privileged characteristic, that is, say, your class, your race, or other issues such as your gender. So that means that there is not very much disproportion in the status quo. But also they say that we'll have a better decision making because young people have better access to media, they less likely to follow radical ideas and etc. But this much depends on your pre-existing biases. That is to say, if you are being raised in conservative community or in very racist white society, you are more likely to be racist. That is to say, because you listen for the media that's listen for the, for example, Fox News, or your community, your parents are talking about these things, which means that even if you are like very young person, it does not guarantee that you'll be very liberal like mindset, right? So coming to our points, firstly, I believe that it is principally illegitimate to literally take away the rights of these people. Yes, this is not directly taking away their votes, but this is more likely this more approximates this, and I'll explain this later on. But firstly, this is a right, your civil and political right to vote, because to choose your candidate, to vote for the policies that you prefer. But in this case, this right is being infringed. But first of all, this right should not be infringed. That is to say, to being able to vote properly and equal with other people, right? Because this voting completely affects you, the way you live, you construct your life, you make plans, and etc. In this case, this right is being, in the large sense, infringed because you are giving disproportionately lower voice. Because in the status quo, lots of people are in some communities, there are young people will get more voices because politicians will orient their programs, political programs, towards them, right? So that means your right is being largely diminished. But this is also like your age is also something that you don't have control over, right? You cannot stop aging, right? You didn't choose to be aging. This is the same as like your gender or race. You don't have any control over these things, which means that it's completely illegitimate for the government side to do so. Before that opening, do you have something?
Note that older people are able to affect politics still to a significant extent due to the fact that they make up a lot of parliamentary members, that they make up boards of directors. That means they're able to push their interests very significantly, even though this motion is passed.
I didn't get that, but I think I can clarify in the next speech. So firstly, this is principally wrong, but secondly, on the practical terms, we think there will be lots of abuse of this opportunity for young people. That is to say, young people will get more votes, and all the population will be ignored. That is to say, I as a politician will try to get more votes from my electorate, which will mostly which independent of independent of the scale of this electorate, I will still try to elaborate more, emphasize the issues, address the problems of opening young people as opening government claimant, and therefore this means that I will most likely ignore the problems that are raised by all the population. Specifically, I will try to, for example, emphasize the things that we have to abolish or decrease pensions because it takes away the money of young people, and I will more likely to focus on these things, which a lot of the in most of the cases harm older people in a very large extent. Why is it? Because firstly, they already have like very little amount of time and skills or energy or any other opportunity to work hard, and which means that they are already being like replaced by automated jobs and etc. Or by young people who have much more flexible skills and etc. So this means that older people are already impoverished to get less privilege in the job market compared to young people, right? So, and this is even more important because if you, for example, look at the Western liberal democracies, which make up the which is a place where most democracies happen, right? In these places, aging population make up the majority of the population. For example, in Italy, right? So at the point when you diminish the weight of their votes, there's the more probability that policies that will harm them, that will harm the way they live, and in favor of young people, will be extremely harmful for them, and this will be very damaging both for political democracy in itself and overall will leave these people in miserable position, and therefore we're very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech, and I'll invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue this debate.
So in this speech, I'm going to first characterize the status quo and rebut opening opposition's idea that young people already have a significant amount of power today. Then I will move on to the principle and finally discuss what practical political implications impacts this policy would have, and why those political decisions that would be made under young voters would be better than the ones today. So begin with the characterization of status quo. From the opening opposition, we heard that young people already have a lot of power because they're better educated than older people and can therefore get top positions in companies and politics. And opening opposition tells us that education and education and gender and other factors like this are the key determinant of success, and age is pretty much irrelevant. But we tell you that there are structural differences between young people today and the older generations today. That is to say, older generations benefited from huge benefits that society gave them that young people, for the most part, do not. These include things like free education that older baby boomers in America got, whereas today, and the same in Britain and many other places where student loans have been recently introduced, young people today are suffering from huge amounts of student loans and debt. There's less social mobility today because, like, labor regulations have become more and more relaxed over the past decades, meaning there's more gig work and minimum wages have been dropped, and basically like low-skilled wages have been stagnating. And meanwhile, house prices have been going up because the current old people bought a lot of houses like in the 30 years ago, and after that they have become NIMBYs who have opposed all new construction, and that's why we see huge trends today where cities have become unaffordable, and the majority of young people cannot access these kinds of houses and things, education and other things that the older generations took for granted. So we say that there is indeed a massive structural divide between the old and the young, and reasons why the incentives of these two groups specifically, and not like just groups from different educational backgrounds, are opposed. So even if you are young people with education, that in today's world does not guarantee that you will be able to actually get a better quality of life than your parents did. So given this characterization and like the huge amounts of benefits and free education and other things that the older generations profited from, we believe that the old in today's society have disproportionate power, and that they are using this power in a way that disadvantages the young. So then, moving on to the principle, why is it? So from opening opposition, we heard the principle that everybody has the right to be heard and that people have no control over their age, and therefore determining your number of votes according to your age would be discriminatory. Note that this is not true. These older people will have been given the same chance to vote with a larger number of votes when they were young as the young people today are. So like, this is not discriminatory in the same way that discriminating by age, by sex or level of education or level of wealth is, because in this case we are treating all individual people the same. We are just not treating people the same in different like phases of their life, and everybody goes through the phase of being young. Everybody has that maximal vote, so we think that it's fair because everybody has access to the most privileged status in this voting system. Meanwhile, we think that our principle is true. Our principle is that those most impacted by decisions have the most say. So as my partner explained, young people are disproportionately affected by political decisions because, as I already explained, old people will not suffer climate change. Old people are not trying to buy a new house at this stage. Old people don't have to pay back their tuition fees. So there are a lot of issues that really affect young people that old people do not suffer from and don't care about and have no incentive to fix. So then we think that it would be simply fair that young people would have more of a say to offset the uncaringness of the old people. And note that this principle is followed in other electoral systems too, like in the US presidential election, larger states usually have more votes than smaller states. And it's not just true that everybody is given the exact same number of votes based on them being a state or based on how many people there are in that state. You don't have to follow like a very rigid system in order to ensure the principle that those who are most impacted by decisions have the most say. So we think that that is still in line with democratic principles that are often followed. So then moving on to the most important thing in this debate, which is what is the impact of this motion on political decisions that will actually be made. So from opening opposition, we heard that, well, the decisions made by young people might also be racist. I would just like to say that most young people are indeed educated, as everyone agrees, and live in cities. Young people have clearly more progressive attitudes and more pro-immigration attitudes than the population at large, because they're used to diversity. They've grown up in a world that's been more diverse. Then opening opposition says that like a lot of policies will be enacted that harm the old, but we say that not only is this not true, because young people actually also care about the old, and most young people have grandparents. They don't want to abolish pensions or abolish elderly care homes. So I think we will still get basic protections for the needs of the old. But also we say that the old people have already benefited from their power. They've already created a system that favors them through high property prices and them being on company boards and things like this. So they still do have ways to ensure that they will be able to get along fine. But even if the old people suffer to some extent, we think that that's fine by us, because we think the most important clashes in politics today concern climate change, social justice, immigration, and student loan relief and unaffordable living costs in cities. And these are things that affect not only the young, but also the very most vulnerable members of the elderly population. So if you're a poor elderly person today, you too will find it very hard to live in a city. And we think that like young people have substantially more sympathy for this kind of thing, because they have suffered from the negative consequences of student loan debt and high house prices themselves. And they are likely to solve the most pressing issues in society today, also benefiting the old. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech, and now invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to conclude the opening half.
Okay. So the main mistake of opening government is to claim that if you benefited from this in the past, it is completely fair to take away this right now. But the problem with that is that these people, these older people in the past, yes, they benefited from like free education and other stuff, right? But they never know that in the future they will be taken away from these rights, and without their any consent, without any voice to these issues, right? If I have known that in this time, currently I have more power, I have more votes, and when I will be aging, I will lose my voice, my votes, and I'm aware of this fact, I'm more likely to be like consciously do things that will, for example, affect my lifestyle in the future. For example, I'll try to like spend less and knowing that pensions will be decreased in the future. I will earn more money right now and save them for the future. But in this case, it is like kind of retroactive punishment for these people. They never know that this would happen, and you never asked them of their consent. So firstly, opening opposition government tells that young people today and young people 50 years ago are very different. And because young people in the 50 years ago were like benefited from like low house prices and etc., and young people today are suffering. But I think it's kind of illegitimate in this case to frame like this way, because these things are variable, right? We are comparing like older people getting more votes in any time span, and younger people getting more votes in any time lifespan, and versus older people getting less votes, right? So so the things that the policies that did happen 50 years ago could have been introduced now and could not have been introduced in the past. So this means that these things are completely variable, and we should be more focusing on whether young people should get more votes than older people, like in any time span, regardless of any previous benefits, right? But secondly, they say that in the status quo, they have a lot of power because they benefited from it in the past. As I already said, these people did not consent to these things. They never know that they will be taken away these benefits in the future. So it is completely illegitimate to take away them. If you, it could have been fine if you have said them like, I will take away your benefits in the future, so use them now. And in this case, I'll be more likely, it could have been like more representation, right? But in this case, it hurts them very much, and this is bad. Also, what opening government tells is that there are lots of policies in the status quo that does not affect less older people than it affects younger people. And they give an example of climate change, right? But I think it is on the climate change, older people also care about that. So it is very harmful, it is very unfair to say that older people don't care about climate change at all because they are dying, because there are lots of like young people who are from military industrial complexes, and they have an incentive to keep their who work on the oil companies or etc. So it still affects them, like as a CEO or any other employee, to keep doing policies that will harm that will increase climate change. So to resist green like policies that will be more ecologically friendly, right? So it means so this means that older people also care. For example, so there is a probability that young people care less about the climate change, depending on their perspective, depending on their things that they are doing right now, and all of the other stuff. So it is not right that older people don't care about climate change at all. But also, older people also care about the climate change because their children they care about the life of their children, so that their children will be more will have a better life opportunities in the future. Moreover, you can introduce any other flash mobs or any other policies so that will be oriented to older people, if it is really true that older people consider the most the majority of people who resist climate change policies. You can introduce some, you can teach them, you can propagate that no, the climate change is very important and should care about these things. So just claiming that older people don't care about climate change and it will take away your vote is not unfair. But also, what opening up governments gives as analogy is that United States, some states have more weight on votes rather than another state. And so this is the same thing. But I think that this is not completely the same thing. In the case of United States, the states having some more weight, it is based on the scale of population. Yeah, before that, sure. Oh, CG.
Note that old people have entrenched power, and often it is in their specific interest to not have policies that go against climate change because their companies, their homes, and in general, themselves benefit from this. What do you respond to this?
Yeah, sure. I think that, as I already said, young people cannot oil company, right? So they still benefit from the fact that that there are policies that do not harm their company, but which will be environmentally harmful, right? So it is not true that all of the people who are in favor of keeping this oil prices up and doing environmental harmful policies are only old people, right? So it depends on the, as I said in my previous speech, it depends on the privileges you came. If you have studied in the Harvard and you became a CEO of oil company of ExxonMobil, right? In this case, you still have an incentive to keep these things, and this means that your claim is not true. But the most important thing in this debate, that this debate should be compared, is that it is not guaranteed that these people, these young people, will promote like progressive policies or any other beneficial policies as OG claims, but there is a necessarily harm for these older people who will be deprived of pensions or any other welfare benefits, given that they're already deprived of social or any other physical skills to earn money and live a better life. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for that speech. I now invite the member of government to open the debate for the closing half.
Hello everyone. My name is Mert. I'm from Turkey, and I'm the first speaker of closing government. So firstly, I'd like to respond to opening opposition's last speaker. She said something like we'd never be asking the old people for their consent when we were taking away their political privileges. So what I'd like to say is, well, did we ever ask for the consent of the young people when we were not giving them any political privileges in the first place? Secondly, she was also talking about, you know, the example of climate change and how old people would be actually lenient towards accepting climate change, or maybe we could educate old people to accept issues like climate change. As government, we believe that is not quite possible, because you see, there's this thing we call confirmation bias in the human mind. And what it does is it looks at information and it tries to confirm that the information that pre-existed in the mind with the new information. So old people, instead of trying to take in knowledge to accept climate change as the reality it is, they would probably be trying to not accept it. And if they were confronted with facts that would force them to accept it, they'd probably just forget them, because that's how the human mind works. It's not very easily retrainable. So now I'm going to transition into my arguments. There's really two branches of my argument. One is more political, and two, it is more about economics. Coming to politics, actually this ties into my rebuttal quite well too, because human mind, it's not very easily retrainable. It's not very elastic. It can't change too easily, and so old people most likely will have the motive of party loyalty when voting in elections, which means that they might not necessarily vote for the party that they believe will be, making the country a better place in general. They might just vote for a party that they think they've been loyal to for all these years, and they just don't want to leave it, or they've been so loyal to that they think that it's the only good and best party, and they don't even go to any speeches or don't even research anything. They just vote, which is of course not good for the economic prosperity of a country, and well, just everything in general for that country. Now coming to a bit of economics. We know that young people are the backbone of any country, and they form most of the population, contrary to what the opposition stated, because even when you look at Japan, which is one of the most predominantly old countries, even that country has a higher demographic of younger individuals than it does old individuals. So after debunking this and saying that young people are the backbone of any country, if you don't give them the political power that they deserve, you're actually creating some discrepancies between the economic part and economic prosperity, the market of a country, with the political theater of that country, meaning a decrease in economic growth. of course, because if the market and policies don't agree, then, well, it's not going to be good. So let me illustrate this through an example. So the market, let's say, needs some liberal measures, but the old people in that country are socialist, and we know that young people really don't prefer to vote, but they still form the market. So, and old people are, of course, not associated with that market, not associated with production. And the productive young people need liberalism in that country to grow. So if we give these old people the chance to override the young population that is already not very eager to vote, then, well, a discrepancy is going to be created, which means, of course, less economic prosperity, maybe even a recession in productivity for that country. Another thing, so young people are, of course, disproportionately more likely to be entrepreneurs than old people. And old people are mostly CEOs of big corporations. And so if we give young people more political power, what's going to happen is that these entrepreneurial individuals will actually be able to gain more power in the market as well, meaning that, of course, more products will be introduced, which will in turn introduce a period of growth for the country. And also more competition will also be included in the, was that a POI?
Yes.
Okay, let me take it.
Okay. So if these people, young people, are already very entrepreneurial, they have already large opportunities to gain like benefits from the existing political system. Why you necessarily need this policy if they already have such a chance?
Well, I'm not saying really that young people will be entrepreneurial with this policy. Of course, they are entrepreneurial, but if we introduce this kind of policy, we'll actually be supporting their enterprises, meaning that their entrepreneurship will have a higher chance of success, in turn introducing a bit of competition to the market, a bit of growth to the market. And of course, we know the competition is a good thing in the status quo, meaning the capitalist system, because it introduces better products for lesser prices. So I believe I've answered it enough. Is it everything clear? I guess so. Okay. So now, of course, I talked about competition, how it's going to be better for everyone in the country. And of course, I want to talk a bit more about the impact of this policy, be it social, economical, political. So
we have exceeded 7:30, so please stop speaking.
Okay then. Thank you.
Thank the speaker for that speech. I now invite the member of the opposition to continue.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So in my speech, first I'm going to speak about symmetric problems we have in both sides of the house, and then we are going to say what, even if we agree with that young people have to need to have more representation in politics, this is the best and the worst way to do it, and this is going to be a backlash effect and not to be a good result. So firstly, what are the symmetrical problems we have in both sides of the house? Firstly, education. Why? Because, for example, open opposition, open government say, for example, that people have nowadays now young people have nowadays more probability to be a good education and to have a better opportunities to education. But I think that this specifically in democratic process doesn't matter. Why? Because all people have to have a better education too. So if I am a political party, and I have to decide who is going to get in my party, I'm going to say, okay, if you're educated, you can get it. If you're educated, you can get it. It doesn't matter if you are 23 or if you are 61, because I matter. I matter, and I care about your education. So I think this is a symmetric point. Even if you are all person, you have to need you need to have a good education to be part of politics. We think that this is a symmetric problem or asymmetric benefits that we have both. But in second place, we're talking about, for example, that you can change your mind easily. Why? Because even if you are a young person, you belong to a political party, and you have to respond, and you have to answer to your political party, to your party, to say that they want to you say. So I say, for example, if you belong to the Democratic Party and you have some principles of your party, so it's not easily that you have to say, okay, I'm not agree with that, and that's all. No, you have to go with your party and you have the same principles. So it is less probable that even if you are young, or even if you are an old person, you can change your mind. This is a symmetric problem that we have in both sides of the house, because it is not depending about the individual, it depends about the party and the democratic process itself. So now with that clear, we have to speak about, for example, and we can say about, for example, how the economic, that is the only point, the only point, no, the point, one of the points of closing government, the economic point. We can say that, for example, even if you are not understand the market because you are an old person, you have to understand, because your election depends of young people. So even if you don't care about climate change, even if you personally don't care about, or you don't understand how this market it's working, you have to get it. Why? Because you depend of both of young people. So you have to are interested in this kind of terms, or in this kind of field, so you can elevate your probability to be elected by young people, that we are agree that there are the most powerful population is young, but young people can participate or to choosing people. So our arguments, firstly, we think that we agree. We think that, okay, young people need to have more representation. We agree with that. But what is the problem? Is that your measure and your this kind of to do it is not the best, and it's worse. Why? Firstly, because you are and this is our argument, legitimate the democratic process. Why? Because democratic process consists that in you, like an individual, can to choose, and you you can choose, and you can elect the individual that you want to represent your interests, your family, or your country, or your city, and you think, okay, this is the best candidate, I'm going to vote with him because I like him, because I feel empathy, and because I like their policies. But what's the problem here? That doesn't matter. Why? Because even if you vote for a 61 person, they're going to say you, okay, yeah, you vote, but this is not okay, because we are going to choose other people, or because we are to choose more young people. So we think that there is legitimate the democratic process. And for suffragists, but they want to say okay, but so what is my vote? So even if I vote for a person, it will be no elected. Why? Because this is not young, and I think that this is very unfair. So the perception of suffragette is going to decrease, and it's going to say, okay, that legitimate the democratic process. And what is the impact of this? That, for example, in Bedouin, you can control, or you can take control about, for example, protests. Why? Because you say, okay, I didn't elect them. So even if we have the worst president in the world elected democratically, we can say, okay, yeah, it's bad, but it was a democratic process, and we can do something, and we can protest because I voted for him, and now he is, for example, changing his policies. But in your case, it's less probable that people can protest. Why? Because they want to say, okay, but I didn't choose him, I didn't have the control, I didn't have the control about what I wanted to vote by. So this is a problem. But in second place, we think that there are other incentives to people to vote for young people. Why? For example, the abstentionists, people that prefer not vote because they don't believe in democracy, because they don't believe in all person, and they think, okay, it's the same if I vote or if I don't, because democratic is corrupt, because democratic is and this and this and this. So we think that is there are actual currently there are incentives to people to choose new people, to choose new ideas, to choose other points of view, and we think that this is not necessary, because this is there are going to be a backlash. Why? Because if you don't choose someone and this person is taking mistakes, it's like everybody, but if you don't choose it, you can say, okay, it's because they are young, that they don't know, that they don't have experience, that they don't know how they work, the things work. So it's more probable that people think that young people are not prepared, are not right to have this power in their hands. So I think that this is like a backlash effect when all people and citizens have to say, okay, young people definitely don't understand the politics, definitely don't understand the economic problems. So this is bad. Why? Because you are dislegitimating that the things are the politics and the ideas that the new people have or can have, and this is bad for even for young people. So what are saying we? That firstly there are symmetric problems in both sides of the house, but in second place that democratic process is being legitimated and young people is war in your side.
Thank you for that speech. I now invite the government whip to conclude the debate for the sitting government.
Okay, I guess I can you hear my voice?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So I would like to start my speech by giving some generalizations. So we all know that experience is something that allows us to make correct decisions in everyday life. But my question is that, are you going to consider a decision which is going to affect the country for 5 years, an everyday decision? Is this definition applicable to politics? Now, what I'm going to base this speech on is only about some obvious facts, not some just assumptions as previous teams made. So, what is our argument based on? We are just going to say that this defense will create more just elections, and as well as it will benefit the country more during the post-election period. So, let us consider the pre-election period first. I would like to give you some incentive about what's a fixed vote. Mert actually elaborated a bit about it, but the thing is that fixed vote is actually the percentage of vote that a party gets during every election that's fixed. And you know what? It's mainly caused by old people. Why exactly? Like, I'm going to give you some examples. No, the first example is that old people have obviously more calmer, fixed, and unchanging lifestyles. Therefore, they are actually less eager to go for some change. That's why they actually vote for the same party, the party that they have been loyal for actually decades. And a second more strong example is that they have actually built stereotypes about parties because they have seen actually the pasts of such parties. You see, the party isn't a person. The people are inside the party, the candidates are people. The party isn't. For example, I'm going to give an example from my country. In the era of 50s, in the era of 40s, the party CHP was actually a pretty authoritarian party in Turkey during the single party system. And when a second party called the Democratic Party emerged, all people tended to vote a lot for the Democratic Party, just because of the fact that the CHP had been authoritarian in the past and will be authoritarian in the future. This trend actually persisted until a military coup in the 60s. Like, think of the magnitude of such situation. So obviously we have to conclude this point by saying that all people usually form the population who don't change their vote. And if we want an election in which the party who is going to benefit the country the most is going to win, we have to actually degenerate this fixed vote to a level that is eligible for a more just election. And so the second point, it's obvious that young people are the potential of this country. Like you always said about young people care about that and old people care about that. You just make your assumptions, both teams in the both first teams, on caring about something. Like the thing is that caring about something doesn't change the behavior of population. You just consider the behavior of individuals to consider the behavior of populations. What's obvious in here isn't that all people don't care about climate change or young people do care about climate change, but the obvious thing is that young people are the people who are going to somehow save the world from a disaster caused by climate change. Do you still believe that an old person, age 70, will just come out and become an entrepreneur and just start a big business and stuff? Do you believe that? Is it logical? It's like saying that 1 + 3 is 60 and stuff. Like it's obviously wrong. So it's obvious that we are going to, considering all these, give some more authority to young people because they're actually going to have more control over the country during the future. They are going to actually the ones who are going to make the country prosper, obviously. But here's the problem. Now you might say that young people are actually more easily manipulated than older people. But consider the reason of manipulation. So the previous thing actually talked about one type of manipulation caused by the raising conditions of such child. She said that the child, if the child is raised in a racist atmosphere, for example, he or she is probably going to be racist in the future. But the point is that that young adult will grow into an adult and then an old person and then will eventually die. Like the point is that it is age independent. Having a group of racist people because of their racist conditions, age independent. You just say that people who are raised in racist conditions are going to become racist, but you also say that people who have imposed this racist ideology for the old people themselves aren't racist somehow. Isn't there a contradiction in your argument? So, and also, the second type of manipulation is caused by actually the political parties themselves. The parties actually form such young wings to actually pull some more young votes into them. And why do they pull such extraneous amount of vote into them? Because they want to win the election and nothing else. Now, if we consider such a case, then we must say that the party isn't just imperfect, but the party is completely dysfunctional. We have to start questioning, is democracy functional or not? But that's off topic. We have to assume that the party is imperfect, but not completely dysfunctional. We have to assume that the party isn't aimed at winning elections, but instead aimed at carrying the country to a level that is high enough in terms of prosperity. Now, also another team member from the previous team said that there are actually, is that a POI?
Yes, can I?
Yes.
Okay. I think that on your side, democracy is even more damaging because you cannot compete freely because older people won't be able to run for elections because they know that they won't be able to earn much more votes as much as younger people because younger people have more weight on their votes.
So you say that older people should also have a place in decision making. So you're just exaggerating the situation that the old people aren't going to have any rights in voting. Now, here is it. We have to face the reality. Old people, despite being respected individuals, aren't going to influence the country as much as young people. And for the young people, if they start a business, the party that is in charge matters because they are going to pay taxes to them. They are going to get certificates from such government. And if they aren't given such authority to pick their authority, who are going to actually watch them during their entrepreneur, they simply, the point is that they will simply put into a playground of business in which the rules aren't set by them, but instead by some old individuals who aren't even in the game. The case is that. Also, continuing with my points, the previous teams also said that there are some countries with major old populations. And if we consider that there is a country in which there is 80% of, in which the old population consists of the 80% of the population, you're right. But the thing is that no such country exists. Check how population pyramids go along. Even in the most developed countries, the population pyramid is thick from the middle, not from the top. it's biologically impossible to have a hugely major old population. So if we give such situation, if we form such situation in all countries, all democratic
You have
countries,
exceeded 7:30, please.
okay, that won't be the case. There isn't going to be some rights taken away from all people. So in conclusion, obviously young people will have a country prosper and they should be given some.
Please stop your speech. You have significantly exceeded your
some
time.
authorities, and the disadvantages of such process are, to me and to my teammate, proven wrong from now on. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. I now invite the opposition rep to conclude this debate as a whole.
Okay, in our speech, the first speaker is Lia. She talks about the democracy. Why is the democracy important? And now I will introduce why this argument of democracy is better and why and how we win over the opening government and also to the other cameras, to the other opposition and to the government because of this metrics of democracy. First, in the opening government, they mentioned that this characteristic of age and that the old people won't have the opportunity to change things because young people will have these more opportunities to vote and they will have this metric of giving more as the motion more votes to the younger. But I will say why this is wrong and why this is bad actually for all the people, and it is because they are not taking into account the circumstances of people who will fight for the thing they're more concerned. For example, if older people have to fight for something, will be maybe for their retirement policies or what will happen with them when they are working or this kind of stuff. But it is not likely that young people would be interested in fight for something like issues of retirement or this kind of things. In a moment I will give you your point. But what happened if more people are concerned about climate change or something like that? It doesn't matter the age, no matter the age, people who are concerned about this topic is going to vote. But what happens if we limit this to just young people? We are discriminating the right to vote equally to adults. What democracy is established is that everyone has the right to vote in the same conditions, in the same rights. So everyone can defend the circumstances. Maybe the government, also the closing government, has a stage that it is better. Like depends because of population, and there is more people in the younger people that are in the population and not the other people. But as it was stated in the opening opposition, there is some things that we don't have control over it. But what democracy established is the equal opportunity. It doesn't matter if the population is more younger or if more of it is older, but everyone will have the same condition and the same metric for voting. Now your point, Heidi, was opening.
Yes, so firstly, old people know they have benefited from the political system earlier in their lives, so there won't be a big backlash. Secondly, the most important on concrete issues like climate change and social justice, which have not only an effect on the vulnerable of all ages today, but also future generations.
Okay. I got your point, but the problem with that is that you mentioned in your speech that, okay, the older people already have their right to vote when they were younger, and they had more power when they were younger, and maybe these people, or you say that it is more likely to younger people to make the change, but as I already said, this is not necessarily truth, and there is a problem with give more power to a generation than the other one. And the problem is, as I already stated, that they don't have same circumstances. Maybe our people have been fighting or concerned more about domestic violence because people in the 30s or who are married or have been through this experience will have more problems and will be more concerned, but they will be limited by change this at this point because they are already older and they cannot change this reality in their world because they won't have the right to do that. But young people will be more interested than in climate change, and which is already important. And also this change in climate in the climate change or gender equality as government want to sell us, it could be possible also with using the democracy metric, but establishing this state of just giving more power to a generation than the other is limiting the power of other to defend their own circumstances. Now your point, Mert.
So you said that democracy is something that is principally based on the notion that everybody should have equal opportunity. But as government, we have said that democracy is actually a system that has evolved from everyone having equal opportunity to old people having more opportunity than young people.
But I got your point, but in democracy, what happened with democracy is that it is better, and as I already established, that's the point of democracy, that everyone will have the vote right at the same condition. In democracy, you won't see that a generation will have more votes, like we will have just these few, or as the government said, 1.7 to the others, because young people will have more votes, like 4 or 2 or whatever. This is an issue with this because we are limiting the people to know. I was saying that it is better to slow down the process and to to not fast the process by giving young people more rights, because they will be facing other different circumstances than the older people. And also, if the closing government wanted to say that there is more entrepreneurship in young people, and that's why we have to give them the power to vote. But this is not necessarily okay. It is not necessarily more powerful, because there's also old people who are entrepreneurship, and they are not less because they are old. They are both equal, and even if you are young or you are older, it doesn't matter if you are entrepreneurship. But with the democratic metric, then we will establish that you will be recognized by who you are, but how educated or what is your knowledge or what you want to defend, but not because of. Okay. Thank you.
Cool. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you the call and chronologically the reasons for the adjudication. I'm going to try to intertwine personal feedback into the oral adjudication. If there are any further questions regarding personal feedback, feel free to message me on Facebook. My Facebook name is the same as the one you see here. So the call goes as follows. I saw this as a relatively clear opening half debate, with the first going to opening government, the second to opening opposition, and then on a very narrow margin between the closing half teams, the third to closing opposition, and the fourth, unfortunately, to closing government. So let's go through the debate and explain how it went. So the logic we get from OG consists of a couple of points. One is an analysis why they believe that older people are structurally more privileged in society in terms of making up the majority of bodies of power, such as boards of directors or members of parliament. The fact that they are more likely to vote, so more likely to utilize the currently equal voting rights in the status quo, but also having historically benefited from policies in earlier times like free housing or cheaper housing, free education, and so on and so forth, which is then a principal justification as to why the less privileged should now have more votes, which should be the young people. The practical points we get from them are: one, younger people should have a right to have more votes because the fact that they're going to live longer and are simply affected by more issues than older people. Secondly, the fact that young people are apathetic and this will encourage them to vote, therefore granting us more turnout. And thirdly, that we are more likely to gain positive policy impact insofar as young people are more likely to care about things such as climate change, social justice, and some of that. Let's compare this to opening opposition. So in terms of the principal point, opening up says two things. They say, one, we see that young people also have certain advantages in terms of the fact that they are young, they can be more educated, they can achieve certain skills, they can be entrepreneurs, sometimes they are also elected to positions of power. I think they mentioned the example of Finland. But secondly, they say it is illegitimate to strip someone of their voting rights because they never consented to the reason for that stripping, i.e. the older people never knew that they would have the privileges that they had in history, but also they never knew that they would be stripped of their voting rights later because of these privileges, which means they did not have the sufficient information to be able to gauge how they act. Therefore, they should not be stripped of this right. How does the principal clash then play out here? So obviously, neither of these two teams wants the right to vote because of the right to vote. So there is an implicit principal premise behind the right to vote that teams want to accord groups in this debate, be it the young or the old. This principle is obviously, and this is made explicit later in my closing government, the equality of opportunity, right? So everybody should have an equal right to vote because this gives them an equal opportunity to control their life circumstances. This is implicit in all of the arguments of OG and OO when they talk about what kind of life circumstances is this policy going to procure. The reason, therefore, why open government wins this clash is because opening government does manage to show that there are structural reasons that privilege the old, i.e. even though some young people, as opening opposition says, and it says mitigation, can reach positions of power, disproportionately these are older people. Secondly, even if it is true that older people did not consent to the fact that they would have their rights stripped, I am unsure why this is a moral value in and of itself, i.e. given that we take away consent in numerous forms of laws and democratic procedures, I would require an explanation as to why this taking of consent is illegitimate compared to what we get from the other side of the house. The comparison of what we get the other side of the house is there is another group whose possibility to control their lives are taken away. The difference is that this group has not had the opportunity to accumulate capital and to accumulate political influence, but that also this group is likely to live longer and be affected by more issues. So in terms of somebody being stripped of the right or having a lesser right to influence their lives, this happens on both sides of the house because given the number of votes is finite, this is a zero-sum game. So while I do buy open opposition that there is an infringement on the rights of the old, and this is done without consent, this has to be weighed against the stripping of possibilities and opportunities for the other side, which are the young people. Absent a response to the differences between the young and the old in terms of the structural empowerment, in terms of the policies that they had before, etc., opening government takes this clash. Because although OO manages to point out some advantages that young people do have, this is pretty much only mitigation to the extent to which opening government manages to show that still the majority of capital is controlled by the old people despite all of these things. Secondly, the response to the historical policies and historical disadvantages from OO is a principal one. We should discard this because nobody knew that this would happen and nobody consented to it. However, OO doesn't question that it physically happened. Therefore, in doing so, OO implicitly concedes that there was a historical accumulation of capital and influence towards a certain group. This therefore means that given that they have other means of influencing the system that are not votes, will still retain a vote, albeit a lesser vote, but also have less issues to vote on. It seems that if the mutual metric for both teams here is equality of opportunity and equality of ability to influence your life, opening government edges on this principally. But there are practical responses from opening opposition. These are largely twofold. One, we cannot be sure that young people will care more about things like climate change or minorities, because young people can be conservative and racist. And secondly, there are certain policies related to old people which might now be abolished or reduced, such as pensions. The response from open government to the pension point is quite efficient, i.e. young people tend to care about older people as well, because they have their own elders, right? They have their grandparents, and they probably wouldn't want their grandparents' pensions abolished. But the other thing is, to the extent to which open government does show that young people, not necessarily ideologically, because I do believe opening opposition that young people can be racist, but they do also believe that regardless of where they find themselves on the ideological spectrum, they probably care about issues which are existential to themselves. So this would probably be housing prices. To the extent to which open government does show that housing prices also affect the impoverished parts of the elderly population, I am willing to believe that the positive externalities of this policy are also going to spill over to the elderly, even if opening opposition manages to show that not necessarily all people are going to vote for more progressive policies or for more climate change friendly policies. I do completely agree with OO that OG can just assert young people are likely to do this, and I'm not sure to what extent we will get more progressivism. I am more certain that we will get more positive policies for young people who have been proven to be more disprivileged as per the previous flash. But this is also likely to positively spill over into older people as well. At that point, it would seem that on the mutual principle metric, opening government wins the opening half clash, whereas they manage to sufficiently respond to the practical logic coming from the opening opposition. So the individual feedback I would tie in here is to say that it would be nice to establish a principal metric, and this goes for both OG and OO, to establish a principal metric as to how and why you prioritize things and you weigh off rights in democracies. I think that perhaps making this implicit framing that they've mentioned explicit would have been a good thing to do. We say, look, democracy is about equality of recourse towards the state, right? Because the state essentially controls your entire life. The state uses its policies like welfare, education, so your life completely depends on the state. And the state has mechanisms of violence, of force it can use to coerce you if you do not listen to the state, so like the military and the army. And you cannot run away from being in a state, right? So the world is made up of states. You're always in a state. So your only way to control your life is to control the state. So if every individual is a unique moral actor, debates about democracy are debates about equality of power to control the state. Therefore, we must be clear in the fact that equality of opportunity or ability to control the state does not equate to equality of vote, because there are other ways in which we can influence the state. Therefore, the team which manages to prove the most equitable distribution of influence is the team that wins. I'm sure, and I'm aware, this is implicit in both OG and OO. It would have been better if this had been made explicit as a principle. Secondly, again, both on OG and OO, however, more on OG because they asserted this as a benefit. Why should I care? And this is why I did not mention this in the comparison. Why should I care about youth participation? I mean, obviously there's some things which have this hue, this veneer of objective good and objective truth, and then people just say them like, this is a benefit. But I'm not sure why it's good for young people to vote. Maybe they will come and vote for stupid things. I have no idea. You need to give me a reason why I should care about someone voting, the act of voting. And then this can also probably be done through the recourse towards the state thingy, explaining how it's important for people to not feel apathetic and to take the right to vote, because that's the only way for them to control their life and to preserve, therefore, the control over their destiny. But you need to give me a reason as to why this is good. Like also both OG and OO, why is it more important to prioritize progressivism and climate change over other issues? I have no idea. Explain to me why some things should be policy priorities and some should not be policy priorities. I think another thing that could have been talked about here, for example, from opening government as an additional mechanism as to why the old will always be protected, is like pensions are a bipartisan policy. So nobody wants to cut down pensions if they don't have to, because everybody's going to be pissed that grandma now has a lower pension. Like, pensions are a bipartisan policy. This means that there are certain things that are probably not going to be cut and already exist, whereas young people need new policies which are like more controversial and stuff like this. I would say for opening opposition, which could have run as response to all of this into the principle, is to try to give an explanation as to why every individual's preference is morally equal. Therefore, given that we cannot have epistemological access to knowledge of which preferences are more legitimate than other preferences, the only way for us to ensure that the mechanism within the state is fair is to give every preference an equal vote, lacking a prior moral knowledge of which preference is better. And then this would respond to opening government, because opening government premises the part of their government doesn't epistemologically or ontologically know the definition of what better things are. So it's like more personal feedback. Bringing in closing government, right? So what happens in CG? So there's a part of CG case that is derivative of OG and a part of CG case that is not. Let's start with one that is derivative. So and the thing that CG says is, number one, most of young people are going to be the ones who carry the backbones of our economy. They're the ones who are likely to be entrepreneurs. Therefore, we need to encourage them to vote and to take this voting power in order to tailor preferences to themselves. This is dependent on OG's mechanism of young people now seeing this as an encouragement and going out to vote. So this is essentially a rephrasing of young people will now create policies which benefit young people, except CG gives the example of liberal trade policies rather than more equitable housing policies. But the mechanism and the logical gist of the impact are already present in opening government. The second part is the idea of consent, where closing government explains we do not require consent to strip away people's rights. The same way, we did not ask the young people for consent to be disprivileged. Given the vagueness of the statement, we have created this privilege for the young people. It would seem that this statement relies on me believing that there is a disprivilege towards the young people. The analysis of this disprivilege is present in opening government. So then again, it seems for this response against opposition to work, it requires open government analysis. It's not an independent safeguard of what opening government has already given us. Now, as for the things that are new, they talk about one, confirmation bias and party loyalty, and B, about the idea how the young people make up the majority of the population, therefore they should be the ones to get this privilege. In terms of party loyalty, confirmation bias versus like ideas of liberalism, yada yada, I'm unsure why that's bad. So yeah, older people can be loyal to a party, and they can vote for a party that they believe is best because this party has historically shown itself to be best. I'm not sure why that's a bad thing. So if the principle of the closing government, which closing government explicitly states in their speeches, everyone should have equal opportunity to fashion their lives the way they want to, then it seems unclear why closing government simultaneously would question the way people choose to tailor their lives. If an older person decides to be loyal to a party, and this is the way they want to fashion their life, and this is also the principle closing government seems to stand behind, I'm unclear why party loyalty would be a bad thing anyway. I'm also unsure why it doesn't apply to younger people who might just be loyal to different kinds of parties. But the distinction there is unclear. But the second and more important thing here is when, and this is where it also clashes directly with opening opposition. When closing government says, but young people are the majority of the society, and therefore they should be privileged. This means that in the status quo, young people already have the majority of the vote. So this means they probably already have the power to control the policies that closing government wants them to control. So if this is the framing closing government wants to run, then they impose an additional burden upon themselves. And this burden is to show why even if they already have the majority of the vote, this majority should be further increased, which is a different burden than opening government saying they're disprivileged in the status quo. So when this clashes with opening opposition, it would seem that this increases the harms coming from OO, because OO is afraid about the fact that old people cannot influence their lives, because if young people do choose to neglect their needs or to just put their own needs in front of those of the old are going to be fucked. And this is more likely if the framing is that already in the status quo, the old are fucked because the young have more votes. There is a possible response to this. And this is the response that talks about how young people also vote for things that benefit the old. But this one is in opening government. So it seems that in engagement with the harms presented by OBO, CG doesn't have much. Now, what I would add as advice to CG and also to both extension speakers, and then we'll move on to CO. So the first thing for CG is, so when you analyze things like consent, you see how we take consent in other cases as well. Try to find an analogy which seems intuitive and nobody is going to argue with. So nobody is going to question the logic behind the analogy. So for example, I think that a very good example of this is taxes. We do not consent to our money being taken away from us. We do not consent to more of our money being taken away from us if we earn more money. It's progressive taxation, which is in place in most countries around the world. The reason behind this is because the state gets to override consent in order to improve quality of life. This is the general principle of trade-off. We give some of our consent to the state in order for the state to give us back the means to fashion our lives and to be safe in all other areas. We give some consent in order to get more agency from the state, because the state services like education, like healthcare, increase our agency. But for our agency to be increased, we need to give a bit of our a priori agency in terms of consent. And this is an analogy nobody is going to question, probably, at least not the example, because nobody's going to say, yeah, we should obviously abolish taxation and education and stuff like this. Obviously, they can still counter it with a counter analogy, but try to find an analogy which seems as if it's common sense, as if it's something that everyone would accept. I think that would be like a general advice on how to make analogies. And lastly, on extensions, I would say that for both speakers, it will be incredibly important for you guys to emphasize what you're bringing to the debate. So what contribution it is that you are making and why this contribution is important. In the sense that not just tell me what is it that you're bringing that is new, tell me why I should care about that. As in, the point of the extension is to create a reaction in the judge, which will be like, aha, this is the thing that makes me now believe in government bench over opposition bench. So flag the importance of your contribution. Are you bringing the key mechanism for opening case to work? Are you providing better rebuttal to the other side? So you're a better safeguard against the other side than you're opening. Are you providing a framing which deals with the majority of case in the debate? There's almost no weighing in extension and in whip from both closing sides as to why I should care about your contribution above your opening. Because even if I assume that you have perfectly proven your contribution is perfectly proven, I still need to weigh the importance of that contribution. For example, more entrepreneurship for young people versus the contribution of the opening, which is more solving climate change. So in order for me to know which one of these is more important, there needs to be weighing. The second thing I would emphasize is there in terms of analysis, is just like, so closing off, you have a tendency of jumping into conclusions. So we have had people voting on the basis of party loyalty in Turkey. This resulted in a military coup. Like, whoa, that's a huge logical leap. Is it just this one thing that resulted in a military coup? There could have been 8 other intervening variables. So try to lead me step by step through why one thing leads to the other. The other thing is, now young people will vote. Then we get more liberalism. Then we get more entrepreneurship. Then we get economic growth. Whoa, it's a huge step from more young people will vote to economic growth. The first one is, will they necessarily all vote for liberalism, i.e. take a look at all the young people who voted for Trump? So rather, decrease the amount and the broadness of end impacts that you have, try to prove lower tier impacts, but with more mechanisms drawing me through the psychological process of how people think and what's going to happen and so on and so on. Bringing in closing up. So what the problem with closing up is that, again, a lot of the content seems to be either derivative or not necessarily too relevant. So, for example, the argument that is the newest, which is this logic of the delegitimization of suffrage, which is based on the idea that now you're less likely to get protests because people are going to be like, but I did not choose this guy. I did not have control. However, it seems that this applies to status quo as well. So people going to be protesting against the government are probably people who also did not choose the government in the first place. So people who like the government will probably not protest against the government. Secondly, a lot of CEO's rebuttal, as in the idea of like old people have the right to be represented within the political system and get into parliament, seems as if CEO understands this motion like, if an old person is a candidate for parliament, that person will get less votes. That's symmetrical. So young people can still vote for an old representative who has the qualities of intelligence and so on and so forth, which closing opposition cares about. So the motion means people who vote get more votes, not people who are voted for get more votes. A lot of stuff seems to be already present in opening opposition. Like, for example, the idea that you shouldn't make one generation more powerful than the other in terms of like the right to control their life and so on and so forth. What is then the reason that closing opposition manages to win over closing government? There are two reasons. One is the framing posed by opening government, by closing government. Because closing government framing does kind of concede that young people already have more electoral power in their hands at the status quo. Therefore, it's unclear why we should increase it even further if they are the majority of society, nor is it clear why even if they produce the ideological impacts they want, as in more neoliberalism and market economy and stuff, why that is something I should care about and why that is something that is morally good. The second reason is that closing opposition does manage to point out that to the extent to which there is a chance, this is not enough to beat opening government, because opening government has reasons as to why this will happen, but CG pretty much repeats OG on this and doesn't add additional reasons, but to the extent to which there is a chance that younger people might neglect the needs of the old and now also have more votes than they have in the status quo, this may mean that the group, which is, as closing opposition says, unable to become an entrepreneur, unable to become to get a job because they are old, so they have no other ways of influencing their lives, may now also lose their only chance to control the policies that they need to survive. So at the end of CG versus CEO, I believe that young people already have a lot of power. I believe that young people already have the ability to vote in representatives who they like. I believe that if we give them more power, we can just count on luck, as in, are we going to be lucky enough that the policies that are going to be created are going to be good for all people as well, or not? This analysis in OG, not in CG. The reason why CEO loses to OO has already kind of been implicitly mentioned. One, a lot of the logic in terms of the principle and whether you can take away rights from people is derivative. Two, as in the argument on the decreasing of the legitimacy of suffrage, it is unsure why this impact is asymmetrical, i.e. why does it happen more here, given that most protests essentially do happen from the side of people who did not choose the government. There was no additional analysis to differentiate this. This is why CEO loses to OO. Lastly, on the advice for the whips, I would say that both of you need to find a functional structure for your speech, because it was just like a lot of dispersed points of rebuttal, a lot of dispersed points of whipping your extension, which make it very hard to follow. I would say find a structure. You can go team by team and say, okay, now I will deal with CG extension, now I will deal with OG, and now I will compare myself to OO. Or you can do clashes, like there were 3 clashes here. Let's see what all teams say about this clash, why we win this clash. And while doing so, you can use your extension as rebuttal. You can say, okay, I as the whip, this is my first response, but my second response is the extension my partner brings. And let's look at how my extension, or the extension of my partner, actually deals with this and rebuts other things. But try to find a structure, try to stick to it, and try to flag the parts of the structure you are doing at a particular point. So now I have dealt with OO after having dealt with OO completely. Now I'm moving on to CO and similar things, because it felt hard to follow you guys at some points. Cool. That's it for the feedback.